Here you can check for any error messages. Sometimes there might be some warnings. You have to carefully go through each and every warning and informational messages. For example, this network binding order, we can ignore this for now, but in real production environment you may have to correct this warning message. You have to select SQL Server future installation and click next. This is the important screen in the installation panels. Here you select what are the features that you wanted for installing SQL Server cluster. Database engine, this is the main SQL Server database engine software, and analysis services, reporting services, and integration services. These three are business intelligence related features. Okay, analysis services, reporting services, and database engine services. These three are instance aware instances, and these components, they are instance unaware instances. Okay, you don't call as instances, it's just instance unaware components. Okay, so database engine service, when you select that, you will automatically have to select this. Basically you cannot unselect one feature here and select another feature here. So when you select that, so all three comes together along with database engine. Replication, it is used for replicating the data from one server to another server. Typically you can use replication for reporting purposes. Of course you can also use replication for high availability or disaster recovery purposes, but I see predominantly companies use replication for reporting or business intelligence data warehousing purposes, where you select you set up the snapshot and transactional replication. Okay, full text is something like for example, you have a varchar column. Okay, and you have some sentence, you have a, for example, you have something like this. Okay, this is the column value. Okay, if you create normal non-clustered index or clustered index, whatever the index, normal index that you create on this column, then you can index that column based on entire string. This is considered as the entire string in that column. Okay, but for example, let us say you have a requirement where you want to search for the word installed, and this is one word, and this is another word. Okay, and this is another word. Okay, here you have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 words. Okay, you wanted to search this column, this varchar 500 column, where it has installed word. Okay, you have a requirement like that. For example, search for this column where the word v appears first and cluster at the end. Okay, search for the column where it contains the word installed and it doesn't contain SQL Server. Okay, you can have requirement like that. So in that case, creating a full text index on this column suits that purpose. Okay, so this is one reason why you need to have full text indexing on a column, searching for a word in a column. Okay, now let's look into the another feature here, data quality services. This is something new in SQL 2012, where for example, let us say you get data from different sources and you wanted to merge the data. You are storing the records that you get from various sources, and you write it into a particular table. Okay, typically in a data warehouse scenario. Okay, you might want to do some data deduplication. Okay, do some data quality purpose. For example, city like Bombay, Mumbai, Bombay represents the same city name, same city. So you need to do some data quality work, data quality things. This is a new discussion altogether. This is something new in SQL 2012, and this comes along with database engine future. Okay, you have no choice to unselect that option. Okay, this is cluster aware, this is cluster aware, and this is not cluster aware. Okay, let me tell you what the instance aware and instance unaware in detail. SQL Server Database Engine, SSAS, SSRS are instance aware components. Okay, that means you can install n number of instance aware components in the server. When you install SQL Server Database Engine, it will create something like this: all binary files here. Okay, and you can create one more copy of SQL Database Engine. So it will create another folder under this main folder. Okay, under this main folder, this is our main folder. Okay, under this main folder, subfolders. So this is first installation, this is second installation. So whenever you install SQL Server software on the machine, then you will install the binaries under a particular folder, and you can install n number of binaries. You can install n number of instances. So every instance will be stored under a particular folder. You have to select a folder, and it will select under that folder. Okay, so this folder is the instance ID. So when you specify instance ID, so it will all your binaries will be stored under instance ID. Okay, basically you have to understand that you can install a number of copies of SQL Server on the server. Okay, similarly you can install it is not n number, not too many. There is a limit how many instances, how many number of times you can install SQL Server, but I do not know the limit. Usually we don't install multiple instances. Basically it needs a lot of resources. SQL Server is a memory hog. It needs a lot of resources. So if you are installing 2 instances of SQL Server, that means it needs memory, hard disk, and you will see CPU usage, everything go up. So but in some situations you might want to create multiple instances of SQL Server. For example, one instance you might want to use it for development. Okay, you create two, let us say these two instances, these two copies of SQL Server. One you may want to use for development, another one you want to use it for QA. Okay, so if you have a high caliber server, then you can go for multiple instances on the box. Okay, but usually we go with just one instance. Okay, but SQL Server from 2012 onwards, the licensing is by core basis, not a physical slot basis. Okay, physical slot might contains n number of logical processors. Okay, n number of cores. Okay, so you have to pay more licensing cost, fees for per core basis. So that is something changed in 2012. But prior to that, you just have to pay a license per socket basis. Okay, so this is how the instance work. So instance means copy of binaries on the server. Okay, so shared means just one copy of the binaries. So you can only install one copy of integration services on this server. So that is what the instance and instance unaware component means. This is SSAS, SSRS native and SSRS SharePoint. And if you are using SharePoint, then you have to select these two options. SS, you can cluster database very much and analysis services. These are cluster aware components, cluster aware instance, you can say. You cannot cluster SSRS. You have to use farm based deployments, scalable deployments. Okay, the SSRS, and of course you cannot cluster these. These are shareable components, and um, you can use the shareable components for any of these purposes. Data quality client, which is a client for these services, and SSDT. SSDT is a bits tool. In SQL 2008 and 2005, you might be heard of bits tool, Business Intelligence Development Studio, which is used for developing the SSIS packages and reporting files. So now it is called as SSDT in 2012. Clients tool connectivity, I will select that. This is used to create alias on the server. SSIS, SSAS, SSRS are BI related features, business intelligence related features, or components, you can say. I don't select this because let's select that. This is used to connect to backward compatible versions of SQL Server. For example, if you are connecting to SQL 2005 or 2000, you need to have this component. I don't select this option because I'm not developing anything with the SQL Server. This is a SQL developer related kit, software development kit. I don't need that. This is online help library, which I don't need that on the server. But if you want, you can install that. This is SSMS, a SQL Server Management Studio, basic. Okay, so you have option to check or uncheck this box. So I will select this. This is used to manage the SQL Server. If you don't select this, then you have to use SQL CMD to manage the SQL Server. Not many people will do that. Distributed replay controller and client. It replaced replay trace utility in prior editions. Prior to 2012, you have the replay trace file to replay the load for testing purposes, for fine tuning the applications. So now you can use these two new components in 2012, distributed replay and distributed replay client. Again, this is for developers for developing with SQL Server. Master data services. This has been introduced in 2008 for integrating data from disparate systems. Okay, I don't know much about master data service at this time. I have not used it, but this has been introduced long time. I have not used it. So if you are going to use it anyways, you have to select that option. So for our demo, we are going to cluster a SQL database. That's it. We are not going to cluster analysis services and other things in this demo. Okay, in the later videos we might cluster SSAS and SSIS. At that point of time we select just those options that are required. Okay, for now, database engine, and this is the place where we are going to install the SQL binaries. You have to install the binaries in the locally attached drives, typically C drive or D drive, whichever drive that comes with your server. Okay, you might want to you have to keep the database files on the shareable storage, the SAN storage. Okay, typically when the server goes down for some reason, the server goes down, it got crashed, so the binaries will be crashed along with it, but you are protected with the database data files, and you have another server in the cluster that will start processing the request and access the database files. So you always have to keep the database files in the shareable storage. Okay, you cannot select the local storage for storing the database files, of course. So this is the network name, this is the virtual server SQL server name, this is the name that application uses. Application will use this name in the connection string. In the application connection string we specify data source equal to something, so this is that something. Okay, so you can give some meaningful name to let your application users know you are accessing a virtual SQL server name instead of the physical server name. In standalone installation you will specify the server name, because default instance in the standalone, default instance means it just gets the server name, whatever the server name. Okay, but if you install instance name, you have to specify the server name slash that instance name. Okay, but if you are using cluster, then you have to specify the cluster name in the application connection string. Okay, so we are using the default instance and the instance ID is MS SQL Server. So when you install SQL Server, so it will be installed in this directory and there will be MS SQL Server. Okay, you can see here MS SQL Server 11.MS SQL Server. Under this folder your SQL Server database engine binary files will be created. Okay, you can select a different instance ID, something, then you can see here under dot something your binary files will be created. Okay, but you can create whichever name you prefer. You can just leave the default option MS SQL Server. Okay, so this default instance will be the cluster instance. Here you will see the disk usage summary. I need 3.5 GB and I have 7.2 GB, so I have sufficient hard drive to install. So this is the resource group name. You can change it later. And here you can see the MS DTC resource that is not permitted in SQL Server group, blah blah blah. You can assign the shareable storage for the SQL Server to store the data files. So here you specify on which disk, on which drive you are going to, on which storage you are going to store the database files. Here I selected disk 1. Of course you can change this later. You don't need to even select this. Okay, but you need to select at least one drive to store the master the system database. Okay, you need to have shareable storage for master and MSDB, TempDB files. In SQL 2012 there is one change. You can store the TempDB files on C drive. That is not possible with previous versions. So here you can select DHCP. I'm not sure why. Okay, probably I might not have the DHCP server on the machine. That is why. Oh, that is why I couldn't select this option. Okay, so this is the IP address. This is the client access point IP address or SQL cluster IP address. In fact, I have specified 116 in my notes. So let's use 116, and the SQL Server network name is VSQL. Okay, under this subnet. Okay, let's go back. If you are setting up a cluster between the data centers, for example, Geo Clustering or multi-subnet clusters. Okay, for example, you have one subnet in primary data center and another subnet in different data center. So in that case you will have to specify that network here. When you specify the network, you will get one more row for that network. Okay, so then you can specify the multiple subnet IP address here. So if you are setting up the geo clustering, then this panel is very important. Here is where you specify the multiple IP address for different data centers. Okay, now you need to specify the logon account name, under which logon account name the database engine service and agent service should start running. Okay, you need to create service account. You need to create service account where the password for that service account should not expire. Otherwise, if password expires, then the service will go down because it cannot log in, it cannot start. If this cannot start, then your SQL Server database is down. So you need to create a service account, okay, a user account for that matter. Okay, let me say user account. You need to create a user account where the password does not expire. Okay, let's create a user account. To create user account, we have to go to the DNS server, in the domain controller, in the Active Directory, users and computers. I will create a new user, SQL database. Okay, I will say service account SQL DB. User cannot change the password and password never expires. And let's give that the user account or service account administrator access on this box, on every box. Okay, oh, likewise. Okay, that's fine. Right now we created a service account for database engine service. Okay, similarly you may have to create another service account for agent service. Typically it is better to give different service account for these two services. Okay, the reason is agent service might access other resources in the internet, in the network. Okay, because when you create a job, then the job might access a shared folder, okay, on different servers. So in that case, a agent will have to access more network resources, access to more network resource compared to database engine. Database engine doesn't access any resource outside that engine, outside that software. Okay, it doesn't access the share folders like SQL agent job access. Okay, that is the reason why you need to give two user accounts. Okay, so this user account will have admin access on this box. This user account will have admin access on this box, and you can give access to some other share folders. Okay, but if you use the same user account for database engine and agent, then engine might access different network resource. Okay, so that could be a threat. So right now I have given admin access on node 1. Let us give the admin access on node 2 for the same service account. Similarly, do the same on node 3. Okay, so we have given admin access for that user account or service account on all 3 servers. So let us okay, it has to be manual because cluster will start the resource. So cluster will start the SQL Server resources. Okay, we should not be setting it as automatic. And browser service. This is full text service. You can use different logon account later. You cannot set it here. Once you install, later you can set it up different logon account. Okay, this is browser service information. You can set it as a automatic or manual. Basically, why you need browser? Browser identifies the SQL Server service on the server. Okay, for example, in the application connection string, you will specify my data source name equal to VSQL. Okay, VSQL is a SQL Server engine on the server, but you also need to specify port number. But you are not. But sometimes you may specify, sometimes you don't specify. Okay, if you don't specify a port number and if the browser service is running on that box, then browser service will identify, okay, so what is the port that this particular SQL server is running. Then it gets the port and you have the SQL Server network name, and it passes that information to the appropriate database engine which is running on a particular node. Okay, but if browser service is not running, then you have to specify the port in the application connection string. Okay, because the database service listens on a particular port. Okay, so you have to specify the database the service name and the port number in order to correctly make a connection to the service. So browser will help little bit to identify the port that the database engine is running. But if you are not using browser, then you have to specify the port number in the application connection string. That is the purpose of the browser service. Okay, typically you may want to disable the browser service because it automatically identifies the port number. Okay, people might hack. So this is something you may have to decide. This is more convenient and easy for hackers. Okay, collation is another important thing. So how do you want to have collation? That means the data to be stored in the database. Typically a case insensitive, accent sensitive. A case insensitive, that means new in the, for example, we can say my city name equal to Atlanta. Okay, it works fine if there is Atlanta. Sometimes you can say city name like this. So case doesn't matter, as long, for example, let us say your city column contains value Atlanta. Okay, so both conditions will return this row. But if you specify, here you have case insensitive, but if you specify my collation is case sensitive, then this will return this row because it exactly matches the case. This will not return the row because of this case. Okay, that is the reason case insensitive. That is been the situation for a long time. Microsoft developers, most of the developers, they write sometimes they write where city name equal to this, or some places they write where city name equal to this. Okay, both work fine. But in the Unix, Unix flavored platforms, you have to be very accurate specifying the case. Okay, collation is very important in Linux systems. Okay, by default, if you are working with Unix or Linux, you always have to write where class like this. You cannot afford to have like this. This will not return row. But you can still behave the SQL database services to work like this. To do that, you have to specify case sensitive. Okay, that is one thing. Accent sensitive. This is something to do with sometimes you might be having there is a little dot on A. I cannot type because I have US keyboard here, but in the different countries like Spain or China, Japan, they have different peculiar characters where you have a little dot or caret symbol on the A. So that is what it is, case sensitive, accent sensitive. Okay, you can specify appropriate collation that you wanted and click next. Here you specify how the application or users connect to the database service. Only Windows authentication mode. Anybody who has Windows account, they can only connect. But if you specify mixed role, then you can create SQL accounts. You can create a SQL accounts in the database services, and you can use that SQL account to connect to the SQL services. Okay. Typically, by default, system administrator account, SA account will be created with all access. But you have to specify the mixed role here in order to enable and use the SA account. And this is the password for SA account. Okay. In 2005, built-in administrators on the Windows box will automatically have the SA account, SA access on the SQL Server by default. But in SQL 2008, from 2008 onwards, built-in administrator will not have system admin access on the box. Okay, so this is to enable both Windows and SQL authentication, and this is just for Windows authentication. Add the current user, and you can add any other user. For example, if you have a domain group for your DBA group, okay, you can say go add and DBA group or DBA SQL DBA team group. Okay, basically everybody every DBA in your group should have SA access on this server. Okay, so if you are installing, you are the DB in one of the in that group, and you are installing SQL Server, then you have to make sure you are giving access to that group, so everyone in your team can access the server and install or do maintenance on the server. Data directories, you have to specify where your user database files will be stored. User database files should be stored in the shareable disk, shareable storage, your SAN storage. You have to specify the SAN storage. Here we identified 5 SAN storage. We added 5 storage to this cluster, so we can specify whichever the drive we wanted to store. Okay, but in one of the panel we selected just O drive. Out of 5 drives, I wanted to use O drive for SQL Server. Okay, so you can specify the O drive here, but remember we wanted to store the login, SQL Server login in L drive and data in M drive. Okay, for example, MDF and NDF files we wanted to store on this drive. Okay, and SQL LDF files we wanted to store on this drive. So you can come back to that panel. I'm not sure, M and L drive. M and L drive. Okay, let us this is O drive. Okay, M and L drive. Okay, okay, disk 4 and 5. So you can select disk 4 and 5. These two are, we assign these two disks for data and log files. Okay, so we have to specify O drive because earlier it was cluster disk 1. Now we have M and L available. Okay, so you can say M drive. Okay, so this is the root directory. So when you change the root directory, everything else will automatically change, but you can specify whichever directory you wanted. For example, all my user database logs should be stored in under L drive logs. Okay, and tempdb, you can store tempdb just for fun, I'm using, but you have to typically use the shared storage, but you can also specify I wanted to store my tempdb in the C drive, for example. You can do that in 2012, but in prior SQL versions you have to specify one of the shared storage. Okay, backup directory, it has to be on one of the shared storage. In this case I am storing the backup files. When you take SQL backup, this is where by default it will be stored. Of course you can change it, when you're taking backup you can specify the location where exactly you want to take backup, but if you don't specify a location, it will be stored here. And file stream, if you are using file stream in your application, you can enable the file stream here. So this is to enable the file stream for transact SQL access, enable file stream for IO access, so I'm not going to use file stream right now, so I just disable that option. Here you get a little warning message. You have specified a local directory as a tempdb or log directory for SQL cluster. To avoid possible failovers during a failover, you must make sure directory. Okay, so basically you can give any drive for tempdb files. Okay, it is giving a warning message saying that you are specifying C drive for storing the tempdb data files, tempdb database files, but make sure C drive exists on all nodes in the cluster. Okay, we know that C drive is going to be there, but if you specify some Z drive or X drive or some drive which is accessible particularly to the node 1, okay, but it not accessible in node 2, in that case you will have problem because it doesn't know because you don't have the drive to store the tempdb. So when a failover happens, SQL Server stops on the server and it starts on the different server. Okay, whichever the server it is failing over, on that server SQL Server instance, the service will start. When it starts, it needs to have this directory to store the tempdb files. Okay, if it doesn't have this directory, then the cluster will go down because the engine will be down. Okay, that is why it is giving warning, make sure this drive exists on every server. Okay, since we specified C drive, it's going to be there on all servers, we are confident that failover should not be a problem in this case. This is the final summary screen where you will see the options, whatever you have selected so far. You selected database engine, replication, data quality, and this is the default instance. This is the default instance for this cluster, and if you are using one more SQL cluster, then you have to specify a named instance because we already used the default. There is only one default instance on the server. Okay, well, the remaining instances that you create, those has to be named instances, only one default instance. So we are using that default instance for this cluster. So if you are using active cluster, or you are creating 3 more clusters. That means you will be installing 3 more instances. So for the next set of instances that you create, you have to name that instance. Okay, for now it is using the default instance, and this is that instance name. Okay, instance name you cannot change it, instance ID you can change it. So this is the folder that it is going to store that instance binary files, and this is the folder that it is going to store the shared component binary files, and this is the account for the service. Okay, for the database and agent. So this is where the files will be stored, and collation and administrator is CLU admin. Okay, and this is the important thing that you wanted to verify. Okay, what is the SQL Server failover cluster IP and what is the cluster name? Okay, make sure these are correct before you install, because there might be some problems. So you might have given something wrong. You have to verify the summary screen carefully and click install. That's pretty much it. It will take some time. I will pause the video here and I will resume after the installation.